So our new vector for mathematics, which you said, has to be flourishing. Flourishing is human beings exhibiting virtues, because when we exhibit virtues, we work better collaboratively. We have better understanding of each other. So mathematics, was already a vehicle for that prior to formal education. So what education, I think, has to do is shift its direction. And once the direction is shifted, like, okay, that's a direction that we now collectively move in. That is, for me, the starting point, choosing a new North Star.
Welcome to the Education Matters podcast. Today's guest is unlike any math teacher or educator, really, that I've ever met. Sunil Singh doesn't see mathematics as a set of procedures or standardized skills. He sees it as a profoundly human pursuit, one that can support mental health, deepen curiosity, and even connect us to ancient wisdom. If this sounds poetic, it's because it is. Sunil speaks about math the way a philosopher speaks about virtue, or the way a musician speaks about sound. And as you'll hear, that framing isn't just beautiful, it's transformative. The best way to describe Sunil is as a mathematics iconoclast, as well as a globally respected math educator, author, and storyteller. He's delivered over 100 keynotes and workshops across the globe, including at the Museum of Mathematics, the Royal Conservatory of Music in Toronto, and the Italian Cultural Institute in New York. In 2001, he was invited by the United States National Commission on Mathematics Instruction to give a talk on culturally responsive mathematics. He's also the author of several fascinating books on mathematics and is currently co-authoring 2 books, one titled Amoret in Wonderland, A Child's Imaginative Journey Towards the Land of Algebra, co-authored with Amoret Leon, and a second book called The Curious Case of Mathematics, Mental Health and Curiosity, co-authored with Dr. Gina Tchaikovsky. In today's conversation, we explore the personal experiences that have shaped Sunil's view of learning, including his discovery of a mysterious math textbook as a 9-year-old, his disillusionment with conventional math instruction, and the long road to finding his voice as an educator and author. We also talk about how curiosity acts as a proxy for well-being, how math classrooms can become spaces of joy and reflection, and how the very structure of math education may need to change direction entirely. This is a conversation for anyone who has ever loved or feared math, and for anyone who believes, as Sunil does, that wonder and wisdom belong at the heart of education. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Sunil Singh. Sunil Singh, welcome to the Education Matters podcast. Where does the podcast find you today?
The podcast finds me in my home in lovely Pickering, Ontario, which is about 20 minutes just east of Toronto.
You know, it's actually funny enough. We are playing the Pickering AAA baseball team this evening, but they're coming to us. We're not coming out that way.
Oh, okay. Because if you were in the area, I would have said, stop by and say hi.
Yeah, no. So
sure.
we will be on the return game, so I'll make sure I let you know.
Perfect.
Well, wonderful. Thanks, Sunil, so much for joining. We met through the wonderful Gina Tchaikovsky, and we've been having numerous conversations since. We met at the Mental Health Summit in Alberta, and we certainly have a lot in common in how we view the future of education. So I've been very excited to have you on the podcast. Like we always do, we start by giving the audience a sense of who the guest is, and really another way of putting it is like we get to learn your origin story a little bit. So can you tell me where and when did you grow up?
Well, I was born in Hobart, Tasmania. And so I don't have dual citizenship, but I would one day like to apply. And my father had a choice of either staying in Australia. He was doing his postdoc with Bayer. Stay in Australia, come back to India, or come to Canada. And at that time, Canada paid people to emigrate. It wasn't much, maybe about $100 a month, but it was a very sort of fertile period for immigration, the late 60s, early 70s. So my dad, came to Canada first by himself, like, many people, 6 months. Was eating omelet and peas for lunch and dinner. We came later. And in 1972, I know we talked about this the other day, was a pivotal moment. And I'm going to try to balance out the rest of my background, but I want to come back to 1972, maybe later in terms of some of the questions. But we bought our first house in 1972, $33,000. And, that was an amazing experience of, moving from apartments and, to your own house as a 9-year-old kid. It was amazing growing up in North York. And then eventually, of course, I went to school. Didn't know what I wanted to do university. Then education sort of like, okay, you know what, I'll become a teacher. Now, to be honest, I wasn't like, wow, I've always wanted to be a teacher. That's not the narrative. It was, I chose for practical reasons. And, I thought, what, I've coached baseball, I think I'm a good mentor coach. And I thought, I think teaching would be the vocation for me. And so I became a teacher, and I taught for almost 20 years in a community college and in high school, also international baccalaureate school in Switzerland, in Lausanne. But I quit in 2013, and this will now start to fold into, I think, our podcast and questions today. I quit in 2013 at the top of my pay grid because I didn't like the way mathematics was being taught. And if I was frustrated by it, if I was bored by the content and I'm getting paid, could you imagine our students? And it was probably one of the best decisions I ever made in my life, looking back now, almost 12 years. Went through a series of ups and downs. I've written, 3 books on mathematics, and really have found my place and my voice in the area of narrative, storytelling, math history. We all like to tell stories, whether around the dinner table, listen to stories, listen to people's travel stories. Stories transfer energy. We love to hear stories. And I find that mathematical stories, like any stories throughout history, are magical and have this sort of attractive element to them in terms of not only retaining the information, but being inspired to learn more. So that's a bit of my background, but we will go back to 1972.
Yeah, I do, because I do want to go there, because I too am fascinated by stories, and as I hinted at the beginning here, origin stories. So when you were a child, maybe in North York, maybe 1972, whenever it might be for you, can you describe how you played as a child?
Wow, I like that question. I played, I think, like every child in my neighborhood. We're all latchkey kids. Freedom to explore, freedom of time. That was a common element. We played in the surroundings that we had, which would sometimes be like, development of new houses, explore the building of new houses and walking on those wood planks, and, any forest area, which was eventually going to be developed, we'd explore the forest. Now, if I went back to that time, I'm sure the forest wasn't big, but as soon as we entered some element of green in suburbia, I mean, the forest could have been Narnia. It was just magical in terms of what we found. And maybe it was like a cigarette butt, like the older teenagers came here, or someone's building a tree fort, and just the smell of the forest. And so the play was very organic, and it was very communal. Like, this is what all our friends did. We got on our bikes, we played baseball, we just made up stuff on the spot, street hockey, of course, yelling car, all those things. It wasn't just my experience. It was the experience of all my friends in the neighborhood. So now when I talk to some of them, who I still have contact with, it's interesting. that they have perspective on your life that you didn't see because
Mm.
they might have remember the first time they came over to your house and had a samosa, but you forgot that, but they remember that.
Of
So
course.
it's really important for me of childhood to somehow, if possible, stay connected to your childhood friends because they patch in the missing colors and
Mm.
perspectives, and that only enhances your memories of childhood.
When it comes to your learning, and it doesn't have to be formal learning at school or anything, what was your first love? Was it math?
Yep. It was in terms of subject, yes, and that story goes back to 1972. In fact, I ended up writing an article for NCTM about it, about the stage of romance, which is important in learning, based on Alfred North Whitehead's Rhythm of Learning, which came out in 1929, his book Aims of Education, which used to be, well, not used to be, was a part of the 1968 Hall Dennis report of anchoring that philosophy of, romance, precision, and generalization into the framework of education. And I think both of us experienced that, in terms of the output of that, open classrooms and things like that. But going back to 1972 in terms of first love, it was mathematics. Now it seems cliche, but it's a really important story in terms of, I think, how I would like the viewers and listeners to envision what mathematics education should be like. So in 1972, you move into a new house, and there's always like these odd things left behind. Sometimes furniture, right? But usually, like there's some odd little things left behind,
Mm.
and you know. So the room that was going to be mine, um, I opened the closet, and there was a textbook sitting right on. I can, as I'm every time I tell this story, I can actually remember this as a kid, and so it was resting, and I could read the spine. It said 12 mathematics. It was gold, tan, black, the spine cover, and I could reach it. And I grabbed it. Now I was already pretty good at mathematics, and of course I could read. So I'm flipping through this grade 12 math textbook. I can read it, but I understand zero of it. None of it. None of it. None of it makes any sense. But it's a really weird contradiction that I can read it, but have no understanding of what is happening because mathematics itself is a language. And I came across a word log, and I go, okay, I know log. I sit on a log, but it's not the log that obviously, it's got numbers, and you take a log of 1,000, and I saw three, and I'm going, of course, I don't know how to do any of this. And here's the important thing. I didn't at any point um, go, wow, I'm going to teach myself this uh, over the next 2 years. I did the math. I was 9 years old, grade three, grade 12. Oh, in 9 years, I'm going to be able to know this. And I don't mind waiting 9 years. It's the same way when we played street hockey, we imagined ourselves to be, whatever, our, Daryl Sittler or Dave Keon or Frank Mahovlich or, Jean Beliveau. These were, and again, I mean, we know we weren't going to play in the NHL, but for the people who had that level and played, they knew that getting a cup or playing that level would come in time. They
Mm.
weren't romanticizing it for the next day or next year. Same way when you see when you're a young kid, oh, I can't wait to drive. You're going to drive in 10 years from now, you know. So that same long game, I played with mathematics. And that's really important in terms of it's not about accelerating learning. It's not about any of those things. It's about kids having a romance intersection with mathematics during that phase in which Alfred North Whitehead actually talked where romance can occur, which is your childhood.
Mm. What was the romance, or to put another way, what was the appeal? What do you think it was? So you see this mysterious book with a foreign language.
I think you just
Um,
nailed it. It was mysterious, foreign, didn't understand it, understood the words around it, the questions being asked, didn't know the answers, but I could read the question. I didn't understand it, but I could, in terms of the actual, verbs, nouns, and things like that. I understood it as a sentence.
Mm-hmm.
But the delta between what I could read and, of course, what I could understand was like in the realm of being mysterious. And it was that mystery which I'm pretty sure uh, led me to my, interest in further curiosity. And that's the other word, the C word, which, it's been 10 minutes or so into our podcast. I thought it would come up earlier, but it's the most important thing. That is your intrinsic engine, is curiosity. And I've said this in a different podcast. If I was allowed to have teach kids every grade from kindergarten to grade 12, and all they did was produce exit tickets that said, are you more curious today? Yes or no? And if I collected those exit tickets over the 12 years, I found that 90% of those exit tickets said yes. I wouldn't have to know their marks because I know their marks were good. Conversely, if I knew a student's mark and it was really high, I could not assume for 1 second that they were curious about their subject.
Hmm. Well, so let's dive into it, because I came across you and your work through a good friend of mine, Dean Sharesky, who would always cite your article, Why I Quit Teaching Math, in the Globe and Mail.
Yeah, and 2017.
And in particular, one area where you were quoting, I believe it was Francis Sue's work, around math being necessary for human flourishing.
Right.
And it just struck me because I have a humanities background and, understood how ethics was important. I did a literature degree, understood how aesthetics was important, but it never really had dawned on me that math would be in that same vein. Can you unpack that for us?
Well, I would say that what you just said is probably true for almost anybody. And part of the problem, because it is a problem, is that it's been a generational transfer. So it's been an iteration of that belief that there is a separation of mathematics and the humanities, left brain, right brain, whatever cliches you want to go through. And then even within mathematics, there's been partitioning. But we only have to look and go, because I mentioned history, we only have to mention history to look back at how mathematics was celebrated. Go back to the Renaissance period, where everybody, was either a polymath and, had so many different interests which intersected, arts, humanities, mathematics, philosophy. Some of the best philosophers, or some of the best mathematicians, were also philosophers. Descartes, Pascal. So mathematics took them to a higher realm, or maybe philosophy took them. Like it was so intertwined then. Even Da Vinci, he came from an arts, humanities background, and his drawings, of the human anatomy are still comparable to what we could do, with the best technology equipment.
Yeah.
And so having that humanities artistic eye is not in competition with mathematics. It's very complementary.
And it's certainly something that's been lost, right? So like when I read that, it took me right back, and then of course I remembered some wonderful history of philosophy lessons that talked about the Greek quadrivium, right? Which were the subjects of arithmetic, geography, music, and astronomy that the Greeks believe were the foundations of knowledge. And then once you've done a study in the quad, you would then do the trivium, which is typically what we would consider now, I think, a more humanistic or liberal arts degree, which had grammar, logic, and rhetoric, right?
Yeah. And you said a key word, lost. What we've lost, as I look at one of my books, The Mathematical Devotional, sitting on my desktop, celebrating the wisdom and beauty of mathematics, we have lost wisdom. And I wrote a recent blog on LinkedIn, I think yesterday or this morning, about, that wisdom and expertise are two different things. They're two different things. Wisdom definitely accesses ideas which are ancient. and there's a certain humility which comes with wisdom. And you mentioned the Greeks, but even something like Latin, which it's a dead language.
Mhm.
But my mentor Peter Harrison 20 years ago said maybe mathematics should go the way of Latin. And what he meant by that is, okay, if mathematics is a dead language, let's at least teach it properly.
Mm.
Let's teach it properly like Latin. Let's not compromise it. Let's not co-opt it. Let's not like which it is now. Like it's not even recognizable. And I know we make these attempts, and I think it's really important that I think, generally speaking, in education, everyone has good intentions. I would
Mhm.
say everybody is trying to come up with solutions and push it forward. I will definitely say that. But with mathematics, it's really tricky because like it took me 10 years of teaching calculus to understand calculus. My mark in calculus in high school was 96, 97, but I was a fraud, like many students. I just aped all the procedures. I had no clue what was going on in the underlying mechanics and minutia of change. I didn't
Mm.
understand that. And it
Mm.
took me 10 years of teaching to finally go, I think I'm getting it. I think I'm getting it. And that's okay. And that's the other thing which happened during that period of ferment is that people were given time to explore, time to make connections. They didn't have to come at time, within a 45-minute class and all that. So we've created all these sort of barriers, I believe, to the past, which we need to go to the future, if I
Mm.
can sort of create something whimsical.
So, and you can feel free to take this in any way you want, like looking to the past or to the future.
Yeah.
But what would a truly like flourishing math classroom that prioritizes human flourishing look like?
Whew. Well, I think in terms of just first sounds, uh, because I think of it's almost like the commons, which is North America, or the forum, back in ancient times where people met. A lot of dialogue. I think there'd be a lot of uh, there'd be times would be quite reflective, but it'd be really boisterous, like
Mm.
really. And the talking would also accommodate would come with you know very positive body language. You'd be enthusiastic about sharing what you've learned or are going to learn. It wouldn't be the sort of prescriptive and you're talking because it's mandated or that's just part of the curriculum. Okay, it's time to talk, and using words like discourse. So it would be like you would be excited to come to class and talk. There would be an openness about the mathematics being done. Maybe someone is doing this particular topic one day because they've had interest, working individually, another group doing it in small groups. Maybe there's a large discussion somewhere happening. Very freeing. And I know that the response from educators might be, well, they're not going to, meet the expected outcomes and all that. Well, first of all, you don't know that. Okay, you don't know that. And I've learned that when you uh, do more with less, where you're allowed to be free and to discuss and probe and to analyze, uh, if you're given that time, it's like the tortoise and the hare. You're going to pass the
Mm.
hare. You are good because everything is organic. Everything is comes from the student, and this goes back to a little bit about use of what's flourishing going to look like. The topics that would be explored in a flourishing environment would be of really high value and currency. Topics which enthrall or make students curious. How many stars are there in the universe? How far? Where? Like things which we may not even know the answer to, but the room opens up the possibility of students asking any questions. So I mean, there's I think more to flourishing, but it really is having students be laughing, smiling, coming in whole, like they are everyone comes in whole with their story. They are treated equally. Their voices, everybody is their stories are honored, respected, which I think we're doing already. But in a mathematical classroom where kids already bring in prior knowledge and we erase it like a slate and start from scratch. Kids already have some sense of how does that work? I wonder how that works. But as soon as they're told that, no, we're going to start from scratch, they feel like they're not part of the mathematical discussion community.
You've often talked about, or written about, I should say, both actually, how math education has really had its own history and culture stripped out of it. And when I think back on my education, I think it's absolutely accurate. Very rarely did I understand the just history of mathematics, and it was only much later in university when studying the history of philosophy, you actually came up with the history of thinking, which involved, of course, mathematics at the earliest stages. Can you describe this for the audience and maybe suggest how we can reintroduce it properly, or in what ages that we could reintroduce it?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll just try to keep it somewhat local. I mean, local, I mean the province of Ontario. And maybe this is in general. But I would say the height, to answer your question directly first, I would say the height of writing textbooks for mathematics came in the period 1965 to 1975. I would say that was the golden age of mathematics education in terms of the quality of content, the way that forwards are written, and forwards would be meant to be read by students, and these were very romantic forwards. And it's not ironic. I mean, in no irony whatsoever, that same period was the fertile period of music. We came into the age of Bowie. So there's a lot of things going on in terms of which I think meant for very rich mathematics. But in terms of the whole history of it, I mean, if you look at education, it's part of it is how to scale something, right? How to scale it. Well, how do you scale mathematics? Well, you have to have a common curriculum. You have to be able to have a common curriculum where anyone can come and teach it if they were called in as a sub. So I get that, but if you're going to do that, there's a massive trade-off. And the massive trade-off is, if I can be very blunt, that the general curriculum that you construct will be deathly boring. And you don't have to ask me. You should actually ask the thousands, maybe millions of students which have chimed in about mathematics being boring, all those things. And, we have a long history of trying to fix education and the different math wars, which have, been going on since the last 50, 60 years. But what is not being addressed is that we've lost the quality of content. And that content wisdom has been slipping. We don't do certain topics anymore. I know it's hard to visualize, but, Pascal's triangle, I think most people who did mathematics will be familiar with Pascal's triangle. But the numbers outside of Pascal's triangle actually go outside the boundaries of one into these zeros, and it's a sort of infinite expansion binomial theorem. That's not important. What's important is if you Google that information, Pascal's triangle expansion, the only result that you're going to get back, I kid you not, you can try it, is me taking a picture of my old textbook. There is and I maybe someone has found it, but you are not going to get that because the internet has been uploaded with all the information, but we are losing information and we're losing knowledge, and we're maybe losing knowledge of how mathematics was this purpose back before formal education, in that everybody who studied mathematics, this is so important, everybody who studied mathematics prior to formal education did so of their own volition. Regardless of what race, culture, class, it transcended all that. Everybody explored mathematics because of the content that was widely available to them. And through this idea of proficiency, efficiency, scaling, and all that, iterative models of the last 100 years,
Hmm.
we are now at something really brittle, and it's not going to last.
So, how would you, if you could put your administrator hat on, how would you balance like fluency with wonder?
It's they're actually not in competition, because I think fluency is really, really important. It might be the most important thing, except the definition of fluency in traditional education that's happening is very limited. And they may not think it's limited because it's okay, factual, procedural, and conceptual. Any math educator, any administrator probably knows, yes, if we can get all of those fluencies braided together, our students are going to be great. The problem with that is it's a very limiting view of fluency. And I
Mhm.
only go to languages to share that sort of comparison. And I've talked about the two pillars which are missing, are historic fluency and contemporary fluency. So historic fluency, again, means knowing or having curiosity for the history of mathematics, but also having curiosity what's happening in mathematics right now. What are the, one of thousands of unsolved problems? And if they were to be solved, how would it affect our lives? Right now, we're teaching mathematics in a vacuum. It's the Immaculate Conception. It has no past, it has no present, has no future, literally has no future.
Mhm.
So, and I can give you a really good example of what I think fluency means for your audience. I didn't know this about 2 years ago, but Jodie Foster speaks fluent French. Okay? She speaks French fluently. And there's a wonderful interview of her speaking French. And yes, her French is great, but this is so important. She's leaning forward, anticipating the next question. She's smiling all the time. Her fluency is so high that she's welcoming any question. She doesn't like, it's not like her shoulders are tense or her body language is giving off something where I just hope I can make it through this interview. She's very confident of her French. And when you speak a language really well, regardless of what it is, I'm pretty sure that Jodie Foster's fluency in French is also related to the knowledge of France.
Mm.
Probably she's aware of the nuances of culture,
Mm.
uh, any sort of like this all comes in a dragnet when you have that level of fluency. So same thing would happen in mathematics if you incorporate the historic and contemporary fluency that binds together the other three. You're going to have the Jodie Fosters of the world of mathematics. But
Mm.
until those two fluencies are put in place, all you're really doing is creating passable French to survive a weekend in Paris.
Right. Right. So, can you? So, let me ask you this way: where would you begin to develop this fluency? Like, um, one of the things that has been put out there many, many times is that elementary school teachers don't have math backgrounds. Right. It's
Yeah,
something
no,
like 75% of K to well, let's say K to 8. I think the stat is teachers do not have university credits in math.
yeah.
Is that one of the underlying problems? Is that where you would start in around teacher professional learning?
Um, I can't remember if we've discussed this or not, but it's actually not the problem. It's
Mm.
been made to be the problem. And yes, elementary teachers don't have as much math knowledge as the middle school, and the middle school don't have as much as high school. And the complaints go downhill. I mean, I've been part of those. I've been hearing that for 20 years.
Mm.
And here's my response to that. In fact, it's not a problem. In fact, it's actually has a benefit. And let me explain this.
Interesting.
So if I was to put my kids, they're exiting high school now, but if I was to say you're allowed to have three really great math teachers only, I'd put them in grades 1, 3, and 8. 8 right before high school, get 2 right in the beginning. But going back to your point that the elementary teachers don't have the math credits university. Here's my response to that. So let's say theoretically that I find out that I have a choice of 2 third grade math teachers for my kids, for this coming year. I get to know a little bit about their bio. One of them actually has a university degree in math, was a former high school teacher. Um, Good intentions, like we've talked about before. It's going to assign a lot of homework. It's going to be dry, but she has the math knowledge and the math university background. The other teacher is going to be is a brand new teacher, first year teaching grade, third grade, and comes from an arts humanities background. But what I find out is that what she's going to do, or he's going to do that first day, is say this, that, oh, my name is so-and-so. This is my first teaching job. So this is my first time teaching third grade, which means this is my first time teaching third grade math. How about we learn third grade math together? I will line up overnight for my kids to be in that class, because what children need in the beginning is a disarming environment to learn mathematics, and not the I dotting T crossing of, well, they don't know the knowledge. I don't care if that teacher makes mistakes of 1 + 1 is 3. I know that's an exaggeration, but it's the mutual exploration which is so important. And that was one of the things my faculty of ed teacher of math said: the two most important qualities of a good teacher: honesty and being a mutual learner. And I have remembered that. It was in my first book. That is the two things the one thing, but the two ideas I took with me for my entire teaching career. I never forgot that. I reminded myself every day: am I being intellectually, academically honest with my students, all my students? And am I learning this as though it's my first time learning it? Am I excited about it like it's the first time? And you have that element of a teacher saying, hey, let's learn third grade math together. Any anxiety they're going to have is not there. And so for me, and the elementary teachers bring in that whole, because they're so well versed in other subjects, arts, and they're right now they don't spend much time math because they have their anxiety brought upon by society. It's brought upon the system. Like, I got to get my math up to no. Here's the thing. I would take that humanities teacher who's going to be wildly curious about mathematics. Wow, I come from an arts background, but I want to learn everything about math, versus the high school teacher whose knowledge is calcified. They've stopped learning. They've stopped searching. How can you stop searching for anything that's related to your profession? You are a mathematics teacher. You should, whenever possible, I've done it probably every day for the last 20 years, every day, I have tried to find something new about mathematics that I did not know. I'm not going to rest on my laurels about, I had a great teaching career and I taught that. I don't care about that. I care about what else is up ahead.
So you've done a ton of work, professional development work with teachers. What are some of the more common misconceptions teachers have about, the idea of play with mathematics? Like, I feel like the view of mathematics is it's got to be rigorous, it's got to be disciplined, and no play shall enter. This is the no fun zone. It's just, upload your understanding of mathematics. Are there common misconceptions that they have about that, and how do you get them to push through that?
Well, first of all, just a discussion of the word play. Like, I mean, why have we sort of pigeonholed what this word means? If you look at play, I mean, that's why my second book, Math Recess, why can't something be called Math Recess, where kids are excited to come back in the classroom, smiling, laughing, and all that? Because, when recess hit, that bell goes, they leave their desk and they go play whatever, tetherball or whatever maybe even recess now has been cut back. So I'd really have that discussion of play. And then we talked about, what is our definition of play? When is play appropriate? Now, I'm being devil's advocate here. I mean, your whole life is play. We use the word work, but what I do and what we're doing right now, this is not work. This is play. Our life is play. And if I was talking about the subset of mathematics could not exist without play. And I mean playing with ideas, playing with patterns, the same way that you try, moves in sports, You play around. You're not perfect. Same way you play around with recipes in the kitchen. Oh, I
With
got to start that
ideas.
again. It's the same level.
Mm.
That level of play is what creates the genius of that person because they devoted their time to playing with the idea. So, are students playing with mathematics right now? I don't think so. I think there's a lot of time to it. But the idea of giving them a problem where they're just going, okay, let me just play with, oh no, I don't want the answer. I don't want, no, let me play with it. Listen to the language they're using. Let me play with it for a while. So I would start with first, what are we talking about play? What are the benefits of play? And then kind of elevate that word and introduce the history of it, that the history of mathematics is all a bit about play.
I love, and when I learned this, it just kind of reshaped the way I view education. Do you ever come across the etymology of the word school?
No. And
This
I'm
is a fun
curious
one.
now.
Yeah, you're gonna well, you're gonna say, of course it is, right?
Okay.
So, from the Greek origin for the word for leisure, right?
Okay.
So it who would describe school as leisurely, right? And but the idea is connected very much to play and to exploration. So I always love to remind folks of that as often as I can. I think it fits right in with your notions of learning and play.
Well, related is I love etymology of words. Is the word silly,
Mm.
and right now silly is almost used pejoratively, although I use it a very positive word with my
Mm-hmm.
kids. Because of how stressed out the world is, school is, whatever. So I feel it's really important for me, even though my kids are teenage kids, to find moments of silliness, like just
Mm-hmm.
absolute silliness. But let me just use that right now in maybe in a negative context, the word silly. But the word silly comes from, if I remember correctly, the Gaelic word seal, Sille, but that word meant happy. Like,
Mm.
it was a positive word to attach to somebody, that this idea of happiness or lightness, and now it's been like means something else, immature, or something like that. So yeah, I love the etymology words, and it only makes sense that that was the etymology of school, right? Leisure, play.
Yeah. Um, so, I mean, I can see your concept of play at work when you balance math and mental well-being.
Mhm.
Can you describe how you came to that and how you are such an advocate for mathematical wellness?
Yeah, so that actually idea came from my sister, in many of the conversations that we have. And she's going to listen to this, and she'll appreciate this. And we have many conversations, and she's in Markham. My brother, who lives in California. Um, and every time we're together, we have great conversations. But we're talking about this mental health and curiosity. And then she said this again, came from her, not from me. She said, anybody who's curious, like at that moment, or like they're generally at a very, or they're curious creatures, they're curious in this phase of their life. That's a pretty good check mark for positive mental health. Because
Mm.
if your mental health is negative, it's got a bit of Maslowian hierarchy thing to it. Do you really have time to be curious? You're
Mm.
too busy putting out these internal emotional fires. But if you are curious, and I'm not saying that if you're not, that you don't have positive mental health, but I don't meet a lot of curious people. I just
Mm.
don't, especially people our age. Um, they've stopped listening to new music. They have certain beliefs. They eat the same restaurants. It's like it's a little bit of autopilot going on. And I'm not saying they have poor mental health. I mean, I'm sure it's fine, but to be actively curious, like my dad, he's 89. Um, he's a, formulation chemist. He's still making formulas, chemical formulas for skincare products at 89.
Hmm.
He's doing research on the internet to see what, organics and botanicals and, vegetables, what key ingredients they have. And I know you're smiling and smirking because it sounds a lot like your dad, your father.
Yeah.
Maybe that's where I get it from. I think curiosity is the magic bullet for everything in Silver Bullet, and especially mathematics. And because curiosity uh, has you have no the everything about being curious. It's not your burden. Something has to be put in front of you to make you curious. And if it's not, then it didn't make you curious. Like and that's why it's so light that students don't come in with prior knowledge. Teachers don't have to come with prior knowledge.
Hmm.
Are you curious about this problem? If someone asks me, "Hey, Mr. Singh, uh, this," I'll shrug my shoulders, even if I know the answer, because I want them to explore,
Hmm.
because I know they're going to hit a rabbit hole and find something else. So the more open-ended you have, and I know you had a previous question about balancing fluency and play. This is the root. This will take you to the highest realm of mathematics. And and I know I'm going to forget things, but I didn't want to forget this. There's a quote that says there's a spirituality to mathematics that few people understand.
Hmm.
That quote was by David Crummels, who played Charlie Epps on the show Numbers. He flunked out of, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, the US system. He became an actor. But because he played this really serious role and had to learn the mathematics, somebody who failed high school mathematics ends up saying the quote of the highest realm of learning mathematics. So, how did he get there? He must have been curious about the role he was playing,
Hmm.
doing research, mathematics, not just his lines. Curiosity was definitely there. So, I think curiosity, mental health are definitely tied together in general. But in mathematics, if there's no curiosity, we're going to have poor mental health. And that's just going to fall back to the anxiety, alienation, and math trauma that many of our kids unfortunately suffer with.
So I think we touched on this already. You use storytelling and awe and wonder to help jar people from old assumptions and dispositions when it comes to math. Do
Yeah.
you have like a favorite story
Oh,
that
yeah,
you
I
like to
do.
tell, or do you have a few? Because I think,
I do.
yeah, I think this audience in particular would love to hear one or two.
Okay. So I'm going to say once there's lots of so many. This is my favorite story. And only because Hollywood wouldn't believe this story to be true. And I've made it my own. Like there's obviously a longer version of the story, but I've made it my own. Um, so it takes about 3 to 5 minutes, depending on how sidetracked I get. But usually I can nail it in 3 to 5 minutes. So starting now. So it's 1789 France. The French Revolution is afoot. The Bastille has fallen, although there was only 12 prisoners in there at the time, so it was more symbolic thing in terms of the Bastille falling than the actual people that involved. Um, and there's a girl, Sophie Germain, who's 13 years old at the time. And because the French Revolution is happening, the streets are not safe for kids to play. And they'd be playing whatever they'd be playing normally in the streets. So Sophie's brought inside her apartment. And, she's a bored teenager. And I know you have a teenage daughter yourself who's 12. So just imagine Sophie now. So Sophie's a bored teenager. And she starts exploring her father's library, which is verboten, out of bounds. And she comes across a book on the supposed death of Archimedes. And supposedly Archimedes was drawing geometric circles in the sand when a soldier attacked him and killed him. And he was so engrossed in drawing the circles. In fact, he uttered "No la tobare mis circulosis," which means "Do not touch my circles." And then he died. And so Sophie's reading this story, going, "How captivating can mathematics be that you're not going to look at the safety of your own life?" So she starts, reading other math books, and she actually starts teaching herself Latin and Greek because a lot of the books, mathematics books, were. And unfortunately, her father doesn't approve of this and says, "Sophie, please stay out of the library." So she's playing a cat and mouse game, like she's learning mathematics, with a candle and a blanket, because her father's taking away her blankets and she's stealing them back. This goes on, and finally father relents through the mother saying, look, please just let Sophie. And they go, okay, fine. Sophie, you can teach yourself mathematics. But she's 18 years old. And at that time, girls are not allowed to attend the École Polytechnique. So, what's a girl to do with all this mathematical knowledge? So what she does, she assumes a nom de plume, Monsieur de Blanc, and she starts sending a correspondence work under this name, Monsieur de Blanc. This feels like a Tootsie, 1982 Dustin Hoffman Tootsie episode, right? And so eventually her work, it's amazing. And, she's doing great, but she can't attend. And around 1798, I'm just going to skip forward, a mathematician Gauss comes on the scene. I think a year or two younger than Sophie Germain, 23, 24. I might get the ages wrong, but she's got a math crush on Gauss. Gauss is one of the greatest mathematicians of all time, number theory, so many things. So she's writing all these letters to Gauss, I love your work and all that. I'm sure this is taking time for the letters to arrive, but she's getting nothing back. Okay, fast forward now to 1807. So the French have invaded the German town of Braunschweig, I forget, and Gauss is held up there. And she fears that Gauss will suffer the same fate as Archimedes, that now the French are occupying this German town. My favorite mathematician is going to die. And because the whole family is pretty high up the sort of the social ladder, they had connection to the army. And so eventually, can you please keep Gauss safe? So I think whoever the general came into the town, talked to Gauss, and Gauss is, who is this Sophie Germain meddling in my affairs? So finally, Sophie admits who she is, that she's a female to Gauss. And remember, she had been sending all this mathematics, all these letters. And then Gauss sends back one of the greatest letters of all time. I mean, you can find that letter on the internet. I'm sure your viewers should look at it as well. It's a long letter basically saying that because you've studied mathematics with all these obstacles and that were put in front of you, you as a female must have the superior genius. And that's the story. Sophie Germain went on to do some work in physics too. And unfortunately, she died of breast cancer, I think in her late 30s, early 40s. But, you asked me to tell a story. And if you look at all the things which I marked with this story, like even the death of Sophie, breast cancer, what have I done? I've humanized mathematics, right? I didn't just give the mathematical highlights. I showed context, French Revolution, 13-year-old girl, she's bored, that whole story, and how that whole, and there's so many stories like that, which, and guess what? We remember stories. Look at the details. I remember dates. If I would have not told it as a story, I think I would have forgotten a lot of those things. But I've remembered everything as a story, and I can tell that story over and over again. I can even add things given more time, but that's my favorite math story.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful. For me, I remember I had a bit of an unlock when I came across a book. I think it's called, you're probably you get the exact title. It's on the history of the number zero.
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
And it never dawned on me when it didn't make any sense to me that there was a history of mathematics and then zero is invented later. Yeah. It just completely blew my mind and my entire conception of how mathematics ever occurred. I just thought you would start with 0 apples and then you count 1 apples and 2 apples, right? But the book is fantastic. I'm trying to find the title.
I actually have that book, and I'm trying to eye it on my bookshelf.
It might be just called History.
I think,
or Zero. Anyway, but that whole idea, and then it was an entire story around the invention of zero and how that in itself then, propelled mathematics forward.
Well, if you just look at your laptop right now, you're going to see zero is after the 9 key, which doesn't make sense because 0, 1, 2, 3. So the West has incorporated zero to be mainly a placeholder.
Mm,
And this is my second favorite. I mean, it's not a, yeah, it's a story, but you know, the person who really studied zero was the Indian mathematician Brahmagupta, and he wrote a book called Brahma Spuddha Siddhanta, which had 23 chapters in it. He was also an astronomer. This is really important, because you can't have less than zero energy or matter in the universe. You can't. Zero is supposed to be the lowest number. So -2 is not less than zero. That two is a magnitude. That negative indicates some description about that magnitude. So, for example, in science, we have an electron, which is a charge of -1, and a proton or a positron, which is a charge of +1. Would we ever say an electron is less than a proton? No. We teach mathematics wrong by separating negative numbers from positive, putting a middle school. Zero, positives and negatives should be taught simultaneously. And if you had kids can do 2 subtract 1 in kindergarten or grade 1. Okay, they can't do 1 subtract 2. In fact, it's impossible, right? But if you give kids a week, this goes back to playing with it. You give kids a week to think about it. If you've got 1 cookie and you owe 2 cookies, you've got 1 cookie and you've got 2 friends, or you owe 2, can you come up with some explanation of what is left to do? They're going to come up with their own vernacular. They're not going to use the word negative. I don't want them to. That's going to come later in once it's put on top of their understanding. It's so important in those early grades, as I'm sort of, going off tangent here, but not by much. It's so early in those early grades for the kids to feel like their thinking is valued, because if it's not, you're going to close the door on curiosity. It's all interconnected.
wonderful, wonderful. And the book, by the way, I believe is called Zero: The Biography of a Dangerous Idea. I think that's the book.
Yeah, and it's very dangerous. Anytime we got results which were zero, or in calculus, 0 divided by 0, or 0 to the, like, what does it mean? It is dangerous in times of discussions that come up, and debating what the value of those things are. And it's a book that kids would go, there's a whole book on zero, but zero is nothing.
Right.
Like,
Right,
literally,
right,
it
right.
is nothing, right? But zero is an additive identity that if you add 0 to anything, that if the number stays that number. I know it sounds so inconsequential. The same way when you multiply by 1, it stays the same. But if you ask kids, is 1/2 and 5/10 equivalent fractions? And they'll go, yes.
Mhm.
And then if you ask them, what did you multiply 1/2 by to get to 5/10? They'll go 5. Now, I unfortunately, I don't think they're going to say 1. Because if you just said half and 5/10 are equivalent, then you didn't multiply by any other number than 1 for them to maintain that sameness. And it's that level of thinking which we keep constantly overlooking.
Yeah,
And
because we're
it
just
becomes a
teaching the
house of cards,
practice,
and
the
eventually
mechanics.
falls. It eventually falls in high school because
Mhm.
none of those bolts in that tower were tightened up,
Mm-hmm.
really tightened up in terms of what's happening at that micro level of understanding. And it all goes back to elementary, and this is where people go, yes, elementary is super important. And the way to do it is to give time and space for kids to play and ponder.
So, in this vein of storytelling and exploration, and from what I understand, play as well, I don't want to go too much further without giving you an opportunity to talk about the Global Math Summit that you've organized. That, for those that are not seeing this on camera, I wore, I think, in my opinion, the greatest jersey of all time, which is a 1994 Italian national team Roberto Baggio jersey. And I did it in honor of the Global Math Summit that you're hosting in Sardinia, Italy in September. So, can you tell folks why this is going to be something awesome?
Yeah. Now this one I have not practiced the distilled, version of it, but I will try to just sort of hit the highlights, but also sort of be cognizant of the time. So about 3, 4 years ago, myself and Amy Alsnauer, who's the author of some wonderful children's book, we connected on Twitter, and we both lamented about math conferences. Like, no one's doing any math anymore. No one's talking about math. Everyone's talking about how to teach it. Which to me is like putting the cart before the horse. Well, what are you teaching? What are you so adamant about teaching? Anyways, we were both talking about, yeah, we should have some sort of nice. Teaches Northwestern University. We should maybe have a retreat for 5, 10 teachers, just like what a retreat, like nice setting, relaxed conversations, very philosophical, and we just do mathematics. That was the plan until someone named Atticus Leon, whose daughter Amoret I tutor in Italy, and that would take another podcast to explain that story. But he said, "Well, Sunil, why don't you have the retreat here in Sardinia?" And who's going to say no to that, right? And but it's really important where it evolved from. It involved this love of doing mathematics, and because the way that I was and have been teaching Amoret, he got inspired to, okay, you know what? Let's have this thing in Sardinia. And I didn't think of it at the time, but I definitely think of it now that this is really a potential inflection point because of the way the summit's going to be. It is a gathering of educators from all around the world and from various layers. So not just, we have, people, who might have a lot of mathematical background. We also have classroom teachers, elementary teachers. We have principals. We have CEOs of small startups. So everyone from various radii towards mathematics, so we can see what needs to be changed, which is really what this is about. Because the way we're doing things right now, by the way, we don't have the solutions. Okay, we are not saying we have the solutions. We are coming to the Sardinia, the summit, to bring awareness about all the ideas which aren't happening, flourishing, mental health. What can we do? And so that is happening this September. It's a 3-day summit. We do have Francis Sue coming, who actually speaks a bit of Italian because his book has been translated into Italian. Po Shen Lo, is a former U.S. Olympian math coach. He's coming, and his work is incredible because right now he's going into urban cities like Oakland and rural parts of Oklahoma, giving kids who would not have maybe experienced it high level mathematics. And the last thing I want to say about the summit, which is so much related to that and so much related to the nationality of your shirt, is the mathematician Pietro Cataldi, a number theorist, about 500 years ago. I don't want to talk about his number theory, as amazing as it is, but what Cataldi did is emblematic of what I think the Global Math Summit stands for. Cataldi taught and wrote in Italian, which was not fashion at the time. You usually taught in Latin because that was the academic language. Now, why did he do that? Because he wanted the mathematics that he was teaching and understanding and writing about to be available to everybody in his country. But he went one step further. One of his books on number theory, he wrote, and he gave away freely to monasteries and Franciscan monks to give to poor children. Mm-hmm. He thought the mathematics that he was doing, the high level mathematics that he was doing, a very famous mathematician, that this would be of consequence, of benefit to our most marginalized people. And isn't that what we're trying to do in education? Is to give the best possible experiences of any subject, but mathematics, to everyone. Well, that was what Cataldi was doing 500 years ago. And that's what we at the Global Math Summit want to do with whatever we come up with, not just this year, but it'll be something happening, a yearly event. So I would say that's our sort of ancient wisdom philosophy that we want to embrace this September.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I have no doubt it's going to be It's going to be fantastic. A couple parting questions for you.
Yeah.
Always my penultimate question is, if you had a magic wand,
yeah,
in your case,
yeah,
and in the themes of this discussion today, how would you change math instruction? And maybe it's all instruction. That's typically the question,
yeah.
right? But obviously, I want to kind of ask you to put a fine point on math instruction. How would you change schools?
Okay. I don't know the instruction that would be involved, but I would change our vector. It's like when you're sailing, or you're gonna adjust your GPS. You're not going here anymore. Okay. That's a dead end. Whatever kind of metaphor, language you want to use, parched desert, we're going to change our vector. We're going to change our vector not to, like right now, mathematics is like, okay, we need mathematics, and we do. Like, society, so much data, how to sort out misinformation, really important data science, 100%. But that's an external validation of society. What about the internal one, which was prior to formal education? So our new vector for mathematics, which you said, has to be flourishing. Flourishing as human beings exhibiting virtues, because when we exhibit virtues, we work better collaboratively. We have better understanding of each other. So mathematics, was already a vehicle for that prior to formal education. So what education, I think, has to do is shift its direction. And once the direction is shifted, like, okay, and who's to say we're not would want to go there? We are not lowering the bar of mathematics. Look what Cataldi did. We are raising the bar, raising the purpose of mathematics. And now, if that's our direction, I don't care how long it takes organically, but that's the direction that we now collectively move in. That is, for me, the starting point, choosing a new North Star.
Wonderful. Well, and no doubt the Global Math Summit is going to help us navigate. So with that, Sunil, the last question is always, what book, movie, podcast, album, article would you recommend to the audience? You can pick one of each if you want, whatever you feel up to.
Wow. Well, the book I would definitely recommend is Mathematics for Human Flourishing by Francis Su. We've talked about it enough times. It's sitting always at my desk. There it is. Mathematics for Human Flourishing. It's an amazing read and definitely accompanies so many of the themes we're talking about. So that's definitely the book I would recommend. Podcast. A really good podcast for math is Make Math Moments. Fellow Ontario guys, Kyle Pierce and John Orr. I've been on a couple times, and that's not why I would suggest it. They've had everybody on, and because there's two of them, it really bounces off really well, like in terms of having that second person maybe come in, same question, different perspective. So I love the fact, and they're Canadian. I've known them for a long time. I actually did invite them both to the Global Math Summit. Unfortunately, both for conflict and school, they couldn't make it. So that's definitely a podcast I would definitely recommend. Make Math Moments. And the other podcast I would recommend too is something called Debate Math with Rob Baer and why am I forgetting? He's gonna. I know he's going to. That's not the name I thought I was going to forget. It's called Debate Math. Chris Lisniak and Rob Baer, and they just debate issues of the day, and they get people from both sides, and they have a healthy debate about that particular issue in math education. So those are my two books, and that's my book and my two podcast recommendations.
Well, Sunil, thank you so much for joining. I have no doubt that we'll do this again, perhaps with some other folks around the round table at some point. But
absolutely,
thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Jason. Really enjoyed it.
This podcast is recorded on the territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The show is edited and produced by the marvelous and talented Andrew Mastroianni. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, remember, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's a willingness to contemplate what's happening. I'm your host, Jason Bukhari. Until next time.